Welcome back. This is the last segment of Rethinking Your Next Quarter Century. In this segment here, we're going to talk about how to adapt to changing scenarios, how to construct scenarios, and determine how future fit your organization is, and then the type of actions you can take in order to ensure that you can survive and thrive in multiple future outcomes. So first, I want to start by building on what we talked about in the last module, and that is understanding impact and uncertainty. The importance of impact and uncertainty allows for us, again, to focus in on the key areas that are of greatest importance to determining the future of our organizations or our industries and the actions that we need to take. Now, there are several ways to build a scenario. And before we go into the exact actions that need to be taken for scenario building, we have to frame questions to give us 4 alternatives by which we determine the scenarios we'll write. Now, this is one of many ways to do this, but I think this is the most simple way to do it, so just stick with me. We want to look at this in an either-or type of situation. Now, keep in mind, I'm not a believer that it's going to be one thing or another, and you have to also understand this. The future is unknown. It is always out in front of us. It is waiting there to be created. This is key. What you create is not to determine which scenario may happen or may not happen. In fact, the future will probably be a mixture of all of these elements. But in order for us to make better decisions in the present, we have to have a framework for doing so. And this is where the scenario building process comes in. So we're going to use a model that looks at will-or type questions. So let me give you an example of what a will-or question might look like. Now, this is an example that I used in the Executive Foresight program that I've created. It's a bit more intensive, but the scenario or the organizations that we're looking at were those in the entertainment industry. And we wanted to understand how the commercialization of autonomous drones may actually impact the way that reality TV may change, go away, etc. So we started by creating the first will question. And what we wanted to know was, will the commercialization of autonomous drones create new market space and redefine our concepts of reality TV? So this was the first scenario question. After this, we were able to set up our or question. Or, will the FAA, privacy advocacy groups, and other regulatory bodies restrict the use of autonomous drones in the public sphere? Now, this only gives us 2 scenarios. You'll be required to create the other 2. You're going to come up with 4 alternative scenarios based on the will-or concept. Now, this is important. What this allows us to do now is to start constructing frameworks around these questions if we answer them in a positive or a negative. Now that you have your will-or questions, I want to introduce you to my 5-step process for scenario framework building. And this process contains 5 questions that you must answer in order to give you context for the scenario you're about to write. The first step is this. You want to ask this question. Oh, and let me step back a little bit here. I want you to frame this like an assignment, okay? What I've done with my clients in the Executive Foresight program is this. They have to act as though they are future historians looking back at these situations as though if they occurred. And they have to write this from the perspective of a future historian. So, I'm going to be speaking in the past tense here. I just wanted to make sure that we're on the same page. So here's step 1. As a future historian, you and your team are going to have to answer this question. What happened and when? What are the key factors that took place that brought this about? The second is, how did it happen and why? And this is important for several reasons. You want to identify what steep indicators, the social, technological, economic, environmental, what indicators were present at the time that signaled that this might take place or had a high likelihood of taking place. And then you want to ask yourself, why did it happen? Let's get to the cause of this. Let's better understand that. The third is, who wins and who loses? Like it or not, in every situation and scenario, there are winners and there are losers. There are those who come out on top and those who do not come out so well. You want to be able to determine and identify the groups, businesses, organizations that fit those roles. The next is, you want to ask yourself, what did they do or not do? And that's for both. Those who won, those who lost. What were the actions that they took in order to be successful? Or what were the actions that they did not take that led them to their certain situation? And then the last question is, where are they now? How are they doing? Are they in business? Are they relevant? Are they growing? Are they extinct? These are key questions that you and your team need to understand. When you write this into a scenario from the future looking backwards, it gives you greater clarity on what might potentially happen. The greatest, most successful athletes in the world have got to remain fit year-round and train in order to be competitive and continue to be successful. Unfortunately for them, they can't just sit around, sleep, and eat whatever they want and then go straight into competition and expect to be very successful. The same concept applies here for your organization as you look to the future to help ensure future relevance and continuous growth. Now, after you've created these scenarios, these 4 alternative scenarios, the next step now is to determine how your existing strategies and your proposed strategies fare in each of them. There's a simple process, a matrix that I want to briefly describe to you that you can create yourself that will help you to determine how strong you are in each of these scenarios. So create a 4x4 matrix. And over the top of that matrix, you need to put in the title of your scenario. Maybe it's some catchy title, or maybe it's just the question that you were trying to ask. And this will signify each of the 4 alternative scenarios. On the left side of that column, what you want to do is you want to put in at least 5 existing or proposed strategies that you and your organization have put forward for continuous growth. Now, the key here is to determine where you are strong, where you're compatible, where you're weak, or where you're maybe dead in the water. Now, one of the best ways to do this is to color code these. So for you and your team, if you determine that a certain strategy is strong in scenario 1, let's say, then you want to make that color green. You're good to go. Keep doing what you're doing. If this scenario takes place, you are going to be set. If you find that in another scenario, an existing strategy, proposed strategy is somewhat weak, label it with a yellow. It could go one way or the other, but you need to use caution. And then in other strategies, if you find that you are dead in the water or that it's completely incompatible and you need to rethink everything that you're doing, label it with red. This will help to give you a nice visual picture of where you stand in 4 alternative scenarios. Now, once you've determined that, you and your team need to ask yourself some critical questions. For those strategies that scored in the red, the questions that you need to ask for yourself are, what are the key indicators that we need to watch out for if this type of scenario starts to take place? The next question is, what action should we be taking today to ensure that we are prepared for this type of future scenario? Now, for those strategies that scored in the yellow, you want to ask these 2 questions. Where do we need to focus our long-term actions, our goals, and our objectives in order to ensure success takes place in this future scenario? And the next question you need to ask is, what are the potential surprises that could be lurking around in this scenario here that we need to be aware of? It is the unknown, the wild cards, the things that we're not paying attention to, or the things that we just blow off as, it's probably not going to happen. They could have the greatest potential damage for us. A great example of this may be Blockbuster, Circuit City, Barnes & Noble, you name it. Several companies had the opportunity, the means, and the resources to identify changes and shifts that could drastically disrupt their business and their model. But instead of taking action, it's probably not going to happen. Who's going to take us down? We're this big and this strong. So there you have it. You now have the tools at your disposal to begin creating your long-term future success and ensuring your future relevance. Now, if you decide that you need more in-depth work on this, or that you want to educate your team on how to use this and create an ongoing process in your organization, give me a call. I'm either 1 phone call away or 1 email away, whichever you prefer.